Hey, I tell you what, it's like one of those things, isn't it? It's like at the beginning of a thing you're binge watching, and it says, previously on A Quick One with Ed Parnell. Well, yesterday's Keir Starmer was asked much the same question. And let's see what result old Keir came out with, the alternative to Rishi Sunak's regime.
When I grew up, my dad was a toolmaker. He worked in a factory. It's true. My mum was a nurse, and actually we couldn't make ends meet, which actually isn't a laughing matter. We couldn't make ends meet. We couldn't pay our bills.
My dad was a toolmaker. My mum was a nurse. We found it difficult, we did.
This is the 1960s he's talking about, when there were no food banks, no clothes banks, no support allowance around, and you had to make your own way in the world. I mean, you could claim unemployment or national support, as it was called back then, but that's not the sort of thing that most people wanted to do, because there was an associated shame with it, mainly because the right-wing press looked upon people who claimed the national assistance as hippies or dropouts. The other thing he fails to mention is that although those are both honourable professions, his father actually owned the tool factory that he's talking about. If you look through Labour's manifesto, and there are some fairly decent ideas in there, you will look and find that there are black holes in areas which they seem to studiously avoid mentioning, the two-child benefit cap being one of them. Sir Keir was asked what he would do about that, and his answer was, well...
There's a two-child benefit cap for families, some of whom have more children than that. This is hitting some of the poorest and most vulnerable in Britain. Yeah. The Resolution Foundation think tank says families cannot claim about £3,200 per extra child a year. Dozens of organisations, from the Trade Union Congress to the Church of England to the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, have called for it to go. Will you scrap it? Is that in your manifesto tomorrow?
No, it isn't.
And the immediate follow-up question to that is, why not? The two-child benefit cap immediately affects families that have more than two children and puts them in even more tricky situation than they were in before. Child benefit isn't very much, but it does help, and it's very expensive bringing up children these days. To suddenly have it snatched away from one of your children is bad enough, but imagine the psychological effects of that. You can't have this because you exist. But that's not enough for Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has to keep that cap in place because we're being sensible and prudent these days. The two-child benefit cap is one of the most barbaric parts of the DWP system, apart from the sanctions. It isn't the child's fault that it's born, and it's often not the parents either. Insecure employment or hard times or zero-hours contracts have all made it very, very difficult being a parent. Snatching any state support away from your third or fourth child is really just pouring salt in the wound that you've just caused. But Keir Starmer knows all about pouring salt in wounds. If you just listen to him in 2019 to where he is now, it's like two completely different people. Or is it?
Let's just go through that, because in the last two general elections, you asked people to elect Jeremy Corbyn as their Prime Minister. You said, I do think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister. Jeremy Corbyn, did you mean that?
I was certain that we would lose the 2019 election.
That wasn't my question.
I was certain that we would lose it. I did campaign for Labour, of course I did. I will openly say I campaigned for Labour. I wanted good colleagues to be returned into the Labour Party.
When you said it.
And I wanted a party that was capable of being changed so we could face the future again.
Did you not mean it when you said it?
I was certain that we would lose, and I think many other people were certain that we would lose.
So you didn't mean it?
I was certain that we would lose.
So you said it because you didn't think he would be Prime Minister anyway?
Of course I campaigned for the Labour Party at the last election and the election before that, the one before that. I've always campaigned for the Labour Party, and I'm glad I did, because I wanted good colleagues to be returned to have their seats so that we could fight for the future of the Labour Party.
All in all, this wasn't a great interview. His constant changing of the subject and avoiding answering the questions seemed to present a narrative of, I don't really want to talk about that, so I'm going to distract you. Oh, look, a squirrel. The problem with Keir Starmer's Labour is that they're working at the same sort of thing as the Conservatives. Everyone has a script to follow and carefully crafted answers to give. The unfortunate thing is none of them possess a good sense of improvisation, so all you get is a word-for-word repetition of the same phrases out of different mouths. They're doing exactly the same thing as the Conservatives did between 2010 and 2014, repeating the same phrases over and over again, hoping it sinks into the public consciousness and somehow becomes fact. For instance, deficit left by the previous administration and Labour crashed the economy. I saw Chris Mason interviewing Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Ashworth earlier today, and he asked them the same question, and they repeated the same answer word for word with the same cadence. When Chris Mason said, "I can see you've learnt your script from Labour head office," both of them just laughed. And that's the big problem. If you don't have a team that can improvise and actually work round, it just sounds like it's a scripted response, and by that very nature, less authentic. But then authenticity is not something Keir Starmer really knows too much about.